My name is Handol Kim. I run an AI for drug discovery company called Variational AI, but here I am. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Gary Marcus here. And for those of you who've been living under a rock, Gary is one of the most influential critics of AI today. He's the author of numerous books. He's a researcher and professor emeritus from NYU, and his debates with Jan LeCun, his, I think you're still on good terms as colleagues, but...
no comment.
No comment. Are riveting and compelling. So I'd recommend, if you want to understand the state of the union of machine learning and AI, all the points and counterpoints, and I'd highly recommend that. But also, Gary's new book, Taming Silicon Valley, from MIT Press, is a very compelling walkthrough in terms of both the promise and the problems, and the very, very trenchant and deep problems with AI, especially as it is practiced and implemented today. He is also not just a bleeding heart academic, but Gary himself is a formidable entrepreneur, having founded, led, and selling geometric intelligence in 2016 to Uber, and then also co-founding Robust AI. So Gary has a very unique perspective as a researcher and a scientist in AI, an entrepreneur in AI, and an author of 9 books in AI as well. So we're really glad to have him here, and I'd highly encourage you to go out and take a look at his book. And one of the things that I love about the book, Gary, is one of the quotes that you use in the foreword from Jurassic Park, which is the quote from Dr. Malcolm, which I quote, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, whether they could or not, they didn't stop to think whether they should." And I think that's really, really an elegant sort of summation of AI and generative AI today. Do you really think that they are fixated on whether or not they could or could not versus whether they should?
Honestly, I don't think you could have picked a better day to read that quote. I don't know how many people know, first of all, what the company Anthropic.ai does. Raise your hands just so I can get a judge of the crowd. Okay, so Anthropic today announced that they're going to release what everybody else is calling agents. They have some other name, where you can put in your password, maybe your credit cards, not quite yet. And these agents will do, with a big asterisk, whatever it is that you want them to do. The big asterisk is they don't really work that well. So there's an article in Wired, and on some benchmark, and we know the benchmarks are always too easy, they can do like 60% correct. Imagine that you have an agent that's sort of 60% correct using your credit cards. Okay, that's not great. The liability law and stuff like that's going to be interesting, but that's not really so much what I'm worried about. Like a fool in their money or soon parted or something like that. Some people are going to be involved in transactions they don't like. What I'm really worried about is bad actors using this kind of technology. We have no idea what they're going to do, but one bet is they're going to do a lot of scams, right? We've already seen that with generative AI in general. This is giving a new tool. I'm just going to take a sip. Something that's really interesting about AI that most people don't realize is if your AI doesn't work that well, it's actually better for bad actors than it is for good actors. Now, we can talk about domains like medicine, I think, are different. But if we're talking about chatbots that are basically counterfeit people, to use Dan Dennett's term, counterfeit people are great for the bad actors because they can lie. Think about spam. How often does spam have to work? Well, you can send out 1 million pieces of spam and find 2 suckers, and it's a really good day because those 2 suckers give you a lot of money. So the spam creators, and they're doing other kinds of scams too, like these kidnapping scams where they'll imitate your child's voice, call you up, get you to send some Bitcoin. All that's going to scale even further with these agents. There may be other kinds of nasty things. So this is like unleashing a torrent. And I just posted a tweet a few minutes ago, and I said, Anthropic AI, from the most safety conscious, or possibly most safety conscious AI, to possibly the most dangerous in a few rounds of funding. So they left OpenAI because they worried about safety. And now they're releasing this, and we have no way to control it whatsoever.
So maybe going back to the quote.
It's good that I came on after Liz, by the way, because, well, you can work out that.
We planned it.
Actually, if we planned it more carefully, we'd add her second, but anyway.
So let's try and differentiate. So let's assume these people who left OpenAI for these safety concerns have now started this company, which is, worth tens of billions of dollars, and they've unleashed the Kraken.
Did I mention they're raising around at 40 billion or something like that? I mean, these things are connected, right?
Right.
It is the money that is driving them to abandon their values.
So do you think it's a willful, ignorance, or like, we know it could be used by bad actors, but we feel that we need to bring fire to, the masses and democratize AI for the betterment of society and, screw the unintended consequences? Or do you think they actually have a knowledge and an actual concern about these safety issues, but have decided, on the side of profit?
I think they've decided on profit. I mean, they did actually support the California regulation, SB 1047, that Governor Newsom ultimately vetoed. And so I give them that. But like now there are more dollar signs, more funding, and this just like what could possibly go wrong? Actually a lot. And I just don't see the constraints there.
Well, the title of your book, Taming Silicon Valley, is actually very, very indicative in the sense that people in Silicon Valley kind of tend to, remember when Google started, their motto was "Don't be evil," which is very ironic. But the question is do people and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley believe that they're forging along this greater path and that they're acting in the common good, or are they more sort of like deceitful and more calculated, like how Elon Musk's trajectory has grown?
Yes, to both parts, right? I mean, I think that Sam Altman, well, first of all, I'll say there's a chapter in the book called The Decline of Silicon Valley, the moral decline of Silicon Valley. And it starts with Google saying, don't be evil, and talks about like why things are different from like 2010, where I think Larry and Sergey really didn't want to do evil. Now, the poster child of AI is Sam Altman. And I've written about him, both in that book and also in an article in The Guardian that people can look at from August. And I think that he has a very interesting game. There's like a little bit of sincerity there. He really is afraid that AI might kill us all. I got him to say that in the Senate. We both spoke in the Senate a year or so ago, and he tried to duck it, and I said to Senator Blumenthal, you might want to get Sam to actually answer the question. And then he said, these things could do serious harm to humanity. So he knows that, and he's born on Oppenheimer's birthday. That's a fun trivia fact about Sam Altman, which he's aware of. He talks about sometimes. So he doesn't want to, have that weight, but he also wants to get rich, right? And so he, gives shady answers. He told the Senate, I was sitting right next to him, he said that he didn't have any equity in OpenAI. He actually had indirect equity in OpenAI, as I later discovered, because he had equity in Y Combinator that had equity in OpenAI. And so it was already a lie, and he didn't try to correct it. And then, it turns out now he's trying to turn the nonprofit pledge to humanity to a for-profit working basically for Microsoft. And the rumor has it he's going to get $10 billion in equity. So, he's kind of full of shit. Can I say that publicly?
Sure.
I think he kind of represents a new breed of entrepreneurs. I don't think Larry and Sergey ever played things that way. I've met them. I've talked to them. I also talked to Sam. I think, you have different personalities. I think Amodei, I don't know how he actually pronounces his last name, maybe really started out sincere, but he's got this $40 billion funding in front of him, and most people are not going to think straight with that kind of funding in front of them. So there are different factors for different people, and even a single person like Sam can have multiple conflicting motivations and so forth.
So then to paraphrase that adage, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Lord Acton, you got it, baby.
Money corrupts, and tens of billions of dollars corrupts absolutely.
Not everybody. Look, I knew Paul Allen, and he was not corrupt as far as I could tell. He seemed genuinely sincere in wanting to help the world. He was worth like $20 billion when that meant something. Nowadays that puts you lower on the list of zillionaires. I think that Bill Gates was really merciless, but now really is sincere in trying to distribute his wealth in a way that maximizes his notion of human happiness, or at least sort of maximal years on the planet or something like that. It doesn't happen to everybody, but I think a lot of people are susceptible, and it also, depends on where they are in their life. And so I don't want to make a completely facile overgeneralization, and I see, some counterexamples, and I don't see, I don't know why I'm being so nice to Larry Page, but I don't see him going around doing any of this crap right now, and he is putting money into Google's AI effort, but Google's AI effort, I think, is better. Demis Hassabis, first of all, I think is more sincere. And second, he's put a lot of efforts into AlphaFold, which I think is actually a good form of AI, unlike chatbots, which I'm really, really down on. And that's probably going to actually help people, and that's ultimately subsidized by Larry Page. So there are different players doing different things.
Well, so, I mean, let's talk about Demis Hassabis. Do we know who he is? He's the founder of DeepMind, now runs AI at Google, and a recent Nobel Prize winner in chemistry.
He's also a Sir in UK among his
many
a Sir. Honors.
And also he was at one point the top chess player in the world under 18, or
something like
that.
He was the best general games player, I think, youth in the world, which meant not only could he beat you at chess, but he could beat you at anything else, basically.
Right.
And he wasn't Kasparov level, but he was really, really good at many different games. And the game that he is, best at turns out to be AI.
Yeah. And so if you haven't seen, it's a little old, but it's called AlphaGo, and it's about how Demis and DeepMind created an AI based on reinforcement learning that was able to beat one of the top-ranked Go players, Go being an Asian form of, well, not like chess, but it's very, very difficult, and it was perceived to be one of these intractable problems that AI could never solve, and then they actually ended up...
overhyped that a little bit, but that's...
It was a movie, so it's on Netflix. But let's talk about Demis Hassabis and the fact that he has been recognized, not like with a Turing Award, which is kind of within computer science, but a Nobel Prize in an experimental science like chemistry. And then the week before...
the day before.
Or the day before, yeah. So then Jeff Hinton and John Hopfield, both computer scientists and not experimental scientists, won the Nobel Prize for physics. So when we talk about,
I heard a funny joke about that.
All right.
So first of all, I'll tell you, I write a Substack, and I have no holds barred, as you can probably tell from how I talk right now. And I wrote a piece saying that the physics prize was just not very clear, and the chemistry prize was absolutely clear. There's no doubt in my mind that Hassabis, and he shared it with two other people, Baker and Jumper, they all deserve the Nobel. Baker, the first time I saw him speak in 2016, I was like, this guy's going to win a Nobel Prize. That was all very clear, but Hinton won for backpropagation, sort of, and he didn't actually invent it. And so there's actually a lot of people in the field kind of scratching their heads. But I was at a conference last week, and it's like Chatham House rules, so I can't say who said this, but they said, geez, there must not have been a lot happening in physics this year. Like, it's just not as obvious why that prize was won. It was like a Lifetime Achievement Award, but not for it's not clear how it actually contributed to physics.
well, maybe the jury,
or what was new,
kind of behind closed doors, decided that this is the year of AI for the Nobel Prize, and decided let's go whole hog and double down.
Well, there is a theory that they couldn't give it to Hassabis without giving it to Hinton. I mean, Hinton has certainly been very instrumental in making machine learning popular. He's done a lot of creative work. It's just the thing he won for isn't physics and isn't really his, and so...
Right. So, and I have a lot of friends who are physicists, and I think at least one of them is in the room. So, whether or not you're orthodox...
That's a setup for a joke. Some of my best friends are physicists.
Some of my best friends are physicists. But,
can we do something about that?
But here's the thing. Does this sort of signify a sort of breakwater where, AI has been hyped? I mean, I always say it's like the internet was in the 90s. You just replace the internet with AI and it's basically the same thing. There's a bubble. It's going to burst. People are going to lose their shirts, and people will die. And there are going to be a lot of bad things that happen, and then eventually it just becomes ingrained in our way of doing things such that we don't talk about AI anymore, just like there's no internet association, right? People don't talk about the internet anymore. It's like, do you use the internet? Like, we use the internet to do ABC. Well, of course you do. It's like saying we use electricity, right? And will AI kind of,
All right, can we lower the gain on some of these?
Will AI follow the same type of trajectory? And if so, what's to make sure that it doesn't kill us first, Gary?
Okay, so there are a few different questions there. One is really about, is there a bubble? Is it going to burst? What's it like? Another is whether it's going to kill us all.
I think there's going to be a bubble. I think it'll burst.
So let's take those in two parts. So first, I agree with you there's a bubble. That doesn't mean AI is going to disappear. At most, what it would mean, actually, let me try to say this sentence a different way. Here's what I think is going to happen. Generative AI is valued in, I don't know, the companies collectively are now valued, which is a funny kind of word, at several $100 billion, or if you count, Microsoft and whatever, you could come up with an estimate of trillions of dollars, and NVIDIA, et cetera. So the stuff is valued very high, but the returns on that investment are very low. So there was an article today, or actually a newsletter today, from the Wall Street Journal talking about how basically half of the CIOs, the chief information officers, are feeling like they're not getting any ROI for what they're doing. Even the ones who have kind of figured out how to use it are like, yeah, we finally got it to work, but we're not really saving any money. So a lot of people are very disappointed. I wrote something on Twitter, I guess early in the year. I said, if 2023 was the year of AI hype, 2024 is going to be the year of AI disillusionment. And I think that's exactly what's happening for a lot of people that are trying to use it commercially. So what's going to happen there is at some point, people are going to say, these valuations are crazy. I just ran a piece in my Substack called OpenAI, WeWork or Theranos. And I kind of came down that it's probably not Theranos, but we could talk about that if you want. But it's a lot like WeWork, I think, right? WeWork was, for a little while, valued at $45 billion, and then it dropped like a stone. It didn't go out of business, it still exists. But people realized that its business plan didn't make any sense. They're just renting stuff. That's not, just because you have a charismatic CEO like Adam Neumann or Sam Altman does not mean that you're de facto worth tens of billions of dollars. And you have a whole market around that. And that market, I think, is at some point going to collapse. I think of, Wile E. Coyote at the edge of the cliff. And some people are starting to realize that gravity still applies. And so NVIDIA chips are still going up, but a lot of people are writing articles like the one in the Wall Street Journal today. So that doesn't mean that generative AI is going to disappear. And then I have another point after that. Facebook is giving this stuff away for free. It's not super lucrative to use this stuff, but there are places like brainstorming that makes sense. And the software is out there. It's free now. It's not going anywhere. It just means, you can't buy $15 billion of chips and have $2 billion of profits, revenue, not even profits, or $5 billion of profit. Those numbers just don't square, right? OpenAI's own projections, and those are optimistic, right, by definition, are that they won't make any profits until 2029. That's a lot, and so they're going to, lose $44 billion by their own projection by that. At some point, people are going to say this is crazy. We just don't get it. So technology will still exist, but here's the really important point I want to make, which is that generative AI gets all of the press right now. 95% of the press is about chatbots. But there are lots of other forms of AI, and always have been, and always will be. So generative AI is going to take a hit. It's where the grifters have all gone. And it is going to take a public reputational hit, a financial hit, but people are still going to work on AI, and AI is still going to be valuable. AlphaGo is a much more sophisticated system that is tuned to a particular thing. And I guess your company is probably working on things that are at least in that ballpark, although I don't know the details. But working on a focused medical problem, for example, makes sense. And AlphaGo plays a perfectly fine game of Go. It's not very profitable, but it works. GPS, I used it to get. I live in Vancouver, by the way, but I didn't know this street. I used GPS to come here, and I didn't know Dunleavy, and it took me here, and it's fine, and I don't worry about it. I'm confident in GPS. That's a perfectly fine form of AI. What we really need to do, though, right now, is to invest in new approaches to AI. And I talk about this in my book some. We need to combine classical AI. Let me take a sip. Classical AI, classical artificial intelligence, which works with rules and explicit knowledge and so forth, with neural networks. AlphaFold 2 actually does that in a particular domain. We don't have a general way to do that. And until we do, things like agents are not going to be reliable. They're going to work 75% of the time and make a bunch of credit card purchases, and you're like, I bought what? So in order to make that stuff reliable, we're going to need new kinds of AI. And we can't do that while so many people are obsessed with generative AI because it warps the funding landscape and the academic landscape beyond recognition. a lot of the best ideas in AI came from the academy, and the academy can't compete anymore because people can't run, billion-dollar training runs if they're at Stanford or UBC or something like that. So things are really kind of warped right now, but they won't be forever.
So just to take a straw poll, when we talk about AI, and we talk about generative AI, and I'm sure everyone's heard of generative AI, because that's all anyone ever talks about.
That's like ChatGPT and Claude and those systems.
So generative AI creates new samples, whereas old-fashioned, well, not even old-fashioned, but old-fashioned neural nets, discriminative AI, they classify, right? So these things are in use today. But, and Gary, when we met a few years ago, in your 2019 book, talking about rebooting AI and reestablishing trust, that was kind of pre, the hype around generative AI. And so back then, you were tilting at the discriminative AI and the neural net, deep learning sort of, trend. But what is it about generative AI that's different than, let's say, discriminative-based AI models?
I mean, what's most different, this is not the answer you want in a way, but what's most different is actually the level of hype. I mean, so at some level, the kinds of things that Ernie Davis and I, my co-author for that book, were worried about in 2019 were the same as we're still worried about 5 years later. I would say that what we were talking about there is how do you build trustworthy, reliable AI? 5 years later, we don't have that. 5 years later, we have popular AI using large language models, which we didn't even talk about in the book. But the fundamental issues haven't really changed 5 years later. So people show you these exponential curves. They're like, we're so much better on the benchmarks and so forth. But the reality is these things still cannot reason reliably. They're still full of bias. We had a whole section about that in the book. They still don't really understand language that well, so they still make really stupid mistakes. You never know when they're going to make those mistakes. And so my view is the last 5 years of research in AI have not gotten as nearly as far as I think most people on the street or most people in the field would tell you. I think if you look carefully, we're still facing the same problems. One other I'll just mention there we talked a lot about was common sense. Like Elon, I think, imagines he's going to put large language models into his robots. His robots are really cool. They do great teleoperation. We have an expert on teleop here, Suzanne, who might be able to pick apart some of the limits of the Optimus robot. But it's pretty cool in terms of what you can do with a joystick. And those demos, which were not disclosed as such, but the demos the other day were people with joysticks controlling those robots. And there's low latency, which is pretty cool. And again, Suzanne might give you critique of it, but I was reasonably impressed by that side. But the intelligence that you need to make a humanoid robot is really hard, and Suzanne is nodding her head in agreement. And he's just wildly underestimating how well you could do that with a large language model. You can make a cool demo that, like your credit card thing, is going to work 75% of the time. But imagine a domestic humanoid robot that you say lift your grandfather into bed and it works 3 times out of 4. That is not a viable product, right? You drop grandpa a couple times, you're out of business, right?
Well, so let's play a little game here. It's a variation. I'll get to you. Your first 5 minutes. Got it. AI, help us, hurt us, kill us. Okay, so AI.
Kill, marry, fuck. Okay,
Help.
Say that here.
Help us. Raise your hand. Whoa. Okay. Wow. That's all right. Great. Hurt us. You fence straddlers. You. All right. Kill us. All right. Pardon me? All of the above.
That was a good answer.
Yeah. All right.
Whoever said that.
Yeah. So all of the above. Very interesting. These are not sort of these mutually exclusive sort of scenarios. Well, I guess if it kills us all, then it can't help us, right?
So, somebody quoted me earlier today in a way they think is very apt here. The thing that I said is that the big companies are focusing more on the kill part than the hurt part. Because the hurt is here and now, things like discrimination, misinformation that is messing up elections and so forth. The hurt is here now, and they have nothing they can do about it, or very little they can do about it. Whereas the kill seems so far off, the robots are going to take over the world or whatever, seems so far off that they're like, yeah, we can talk about that, and even if we don't have a solution, nobody's going to hold us accountable. So to some extent, it's a dodge. To some extent, it really is a problem. We should have some people in society thinking about it, but we should also be thinking about the immediate harms, of which there are many.
All right, so we've got 5 minutes left. I guess we have time for one well-formed short question. All right, are there...
My voice is okay.
You okay?
We can take a few.
Okay, any questions? Yeah.
I don't think we have it is the first thing I'll say. The second thing is I wrote an article 4 years ago that got lost because it came out 2 days before people became aware of how serious COVID is. But it was called The Next Decade in AI. It's free on Archive. And I talk about 4 steps there. So the first is combining classical AI symbols with neural networks. But I don't think that's a magic bullet. I think everybody's looking for a magic bullet. But it's not like if we find the perfect way to do that, we're done. In fact, AlphaFold is the perfect way to do it for that problem. But it's not the perfect way to do it in general. And we don't know how to do it in general. We need a more general solution, or we need like best practices about how to do it in many places. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we need large-scale knowledge representations. There's an old system called Psych, if you're in AI, you might have heard of, which had tried to put all of human knowledge in machine interpretable form. Right now, people are trying to take a shortcut, which is all of human language in machine representable form. But the machines don't really understand. So you get these crazy things like you tell it, I have a man and a woman in a boat and they need to get to the other side. And the system gets reminded of these classic river crossing problems with the goat and the cabbage and whatever. And so it'll be like you take the man across, you make him swim back, leaving the boat there, some magic happens, then he comes back across. Like absurd solutions. Because they don't really understand what a boat is, what a river is, and so they don't really have abstract knowledge about boats go to places and stuff like that. If you ask them that, they can say it, but not reliably enough. So we need a much better solution to knowledge. Then we need a much better solution to reasoning. And people are, again, there's approximations. It's always with the approximations that are like 80% correct. That's not good enough for trustworthy AI. And then we need what I would call cognitive models. Jan LeCun, who now actually agrees with me about everything but won't admit it, calls world models. And so call them either way, cognitive models or world models. This is like, I watch a movie, and as I'm watching the movie, I build a scenario in my head of what's going on. So, character A is in love with character B, but B is in love with C, and so there's a love triangle here, and how's all this going to work out? And then there's a plot twist, and I understand, oh, C actually was in love with D, and we didn't realize it, and that, changes our opinion of everything. So we build this model in our head of what's going on. It can even have things that aren't possible in the ordinary world, like zero gravity or space aliens or whatever, and we build a self-contained world for that. You have a model of this room right now, for example. And so, where people are sitting, and you can make inferences like, if there were a fire alarm, you could be like, do I think it's real? Is this Marcus guy really worth risking my life? No, I'm going to get out of here. You make all of these inferences and so forth, right? And they're particular to the model of the world that you have. So we need that too. Nobody can do that very well right now. Again, you can approximate it. It doesn't work that well. Like the thing doesn't really know there's a boat and a person, a man, a woman, et cetera. So those are 4 steps that we're stuck on. We need to make progress on all of them. AlphaFold 2 actually does it for its little world. Its little world is you have a bunch of nucleotides, you have a protein. That is the whole world. It knows how to navigate that world. It has a whole lot of knowledge about that world. Like if we could do that in general, which I think is really hard, then we'd be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of lead bullets, not a silver bullet, until we get to AGI, right? So, yeah.
And then one more behind her.
Okay.
That was a question. In the next 5 years, what's the way to go? Working towards AGI or small data model?
Or what?
Small data model.
Neither? I mean,
both?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing. I would say that we should be going towards robust AI, towards AI that really reliably works like a calculator. Like somehow we're giving AI a free pass right now that we would never give a calculator. Imagine if I said, I have this calculator, it's 80% correct, will you give me a $40 billion valuation? Like that would be absurd, but that's kind of what's happening, right? All this stuff is 80% correct. We should, if we have to go to narrower problems, do that. We should do research on how we can do that in larger problems. We should accept that the solution we have right now is wrong. The way I think of it sometimes is imagine you're in a mountain range. You're trying to get to the top of the highest mountain. You found yourself on top of another mountain that's really cool. You have views nobody's ever seen before, but you're gonna have to go back down the mountain and find another path. And nobody wants to do that right now. And so like the biggest thing we need, and I love that Suzanne is nodding her head, is the intellectual courage to climb back down and find a different path.
So I think one quick editorial on that is you don't have to choose. There are domain-specific applications of machine learning and not AI, and I'm going to use AI in the proper sense and machine learning in the proper sense, which is machine learning is.
Can I insert one thing? An old joke is maybe we'll solve AI before we solve AV. This is a pretty good example.
So, you can do both, and they're not necessarily orthogonal or completely separate, but they're different. But I think we can do both, and maybe some feed into the other. But when we talk about AI, we have this notion of embodied intelligence, and I'll tell you when AI has become part of the furniture is when you go to an AI conference and there's not a picture of a freaking robot with a neural net stuck in its head. That's when AI will have come into its own. Sorry. Your question.
So you talked about billionaires before and how they have this reverse incentives now, right? And the title of your book is Taming Silicon Valley. So how do you suggest Silicon Valley be tamed if they have these incentives?
So I'm not going to give you the whole book in 30 seconds, but I'll give you a lot of it. By the way, New York Review of Books just called it short but mighty. The important thing for you is it's short, right? So you can actually read it pretty quickly. Okay, so part of the book looks at how Silicon Valley fools the public. Another part of the book looks at how Silicon Valley is playing the government. And a lot of the book came out of me going to the Senate, having the people in the Senate all nod their heads and seem sincere, like we're going to do something about this, and then watching them do diddly squat. So at the end, the book is really a call for grassroots action. I'll give you one example. I think we should think seriously about a boycott of generative AI until they get their house in order. Right now, they are stealing from artists and writers left and right, all kinds of creators. They're doing pretty serious damage to the environment and planning on doing worse damage to the environment. There are all kinds of things like covert racism in job hiring and things like that. There's all kinds of problems with it. So if we had a grassroots thing and hit them in their pocketbooks, it would actually matter. It would matter a lot because they're making these arguments for valuation based on customer use. They're not making it based on profits. They don't have any. None of the Gen AI companies, so far as I know, made profits this year. There's some argument maybe Midjourney did. Put aside Midjourney and put aside the chip companies. Chip companies are doing great. Put aside the people selling the shovels. Nobody's actually making money in the gold rush. And so how do you justify a $100 billion or whatever valuation? In that scenario, you say our customers are rising. So if we just walked and said, we love AI, we'll come back, but fix it first. Make it reliable, make it not discriminate, make it not steal, make it not destroy the environment, then we'll come back. That would be amazing.
Except for drug discovery, because we're trying to cure cancer, right, Gary?
You got to pay your kids' way through college, but no, I mean, I think drugs actually, there is some argument there that's better. If I were to have a boycott, it would be specifically around generative AI chatbots, which I think are the worst of the offenders here. They're 90% of the mind share and 90% of the harm.
Okay. Do we have time for one last question? Yeah, all right.
So first, I will admit, I've not read the two in their entirety. I was turned off by Dario's saying we're going to have AGI in 3 years, which is absurd. I found that to be so self-serving, I didn't feel like reading the rest, but eventually I will. Eventually I'll put on my big boy pants. Look, there's the usual form of this argument goes, what about China, right? If we stop building this stuff, then China will overtake us. And I think there are a number of issues with that version. First is, I don't think that large language models have anything to do with AGI. Like, suppose China gets GPT-5 before us, which everybody's been worried about for the last 2 years. There's a whole separate discussion about maybe GPT-5 isn't coming, but suppose China gets it first. What are they going to do? Write boilerplate text faster than us? Like, if they want to plan the invasion of Taiwan with GPT-5, like, let them. It's going to make so many mistakes that, like, it's going to make their defense porous, and we're going to win. So,
we
like,
take the ship over, leave the soldiers there, and then come back.
It's going to, like, hallucinate. Like, I mean, have at it. Let's give it to them. Which brings me to point two, which is we have given it to them. Jan LeCun gave the most bizarre He's a very egomaniacal person. He gave the most crazy pat on his own back that I've ever seen, which is he says, I'm only recognized on the street in 2 places. And so we're listening. What are they? Number 1 is Paris. He's from Paris. That makes sense. Number 2 is Shanghai. You don't want to be the most famous person in Shanghai because you gave large language models to the Chinese if you believe that we should be in some battle. It was a really bizarre thing. But the fact is that large language models are out of the door, or out of the barn. The horse is out of the barn. So there's no competition. I mean, the competition is on. There's nothing we can do there. Like throttling them on chips just makes them make better chips. And so like it's just crazy. I do think that there are things to worry about as we get closer to AGI. But I don't think we're that close. We have a little bit of time. There, an optimistic thing. Hopefully I just made Liz happy and connected, circled the talks back. We have a little time yet before the AI kills us all or bad actors use it to kill us all. So on that note, that happy note, the only one I could find, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gary Marcus, everyone.